Hello and welcome to another entry in the Astrologers Encyclopedia. My name is Matt. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about the Thema Mundi, the mythical birth chart of the world. But first, I have a couple of announcements. Number one is that my readings are open again to the public. So if you want to book a reading with me, if you like the way that I think about astrology, the way that I talk about it, and you want like some one-on-one attention with your chart, I will have links for that in my bio on YouTube. I don't know if you call it a bio here, and on Twitter as well. It's going to be the same link tree. You can come book a reading. I think I'm going to price them at $80 for now, with obviously the goal of going up in the future. So I really appreciate people coming and booking readings with me. I have a part-time pizza delivery job right now, which sucks. And I'm trying to do this full time. So if you want to help me out with that, if you want to get a reading, I would really appreciate it. The second announcement is that I was recently on another YouTube channel. I think it's just called Hellenistic Astrology or Hellenistic Astrology Channel, with my friends Elsa and David. We were doing a video about the first decan of Taurus. They have a whole series where they started with Aries 1 a couple of weeks ago, and they're going to go all the way through all 36 decans, all 36 faces. And they talk for about an hour or two on each one. It's really great, really informative. And I had a lot of fun. I'll put a link to that as well. So definitely go check that out. It should be out by the time this video goes up. And the third one is that the three of us, David and Elsa, are going to be launching a Patreon study group. So go watch that video if you like our style, if you like how we interact, if you feel like you would learn a lot from us. We are going to be launching probably towards the end of May or June, a group where you can come and study with us. It'll be kind of like a discussion forum. We'll have readings for each week. I think we're going to start with volume 2 of Dimitri George's book that just came out. And it'll just be a great place to join in a community of other astrologers. The three of us and some other people have a study group that we've been doing for about a year now, and it has accelerated our learning dramatically, so much over the course of a year. And it can be really lonely out here being an astrologer with no friends in real life. I have one astrologer friend in real life that I can really sort of get down on this stuff with. But most of them are online, and David and Elsa and we live thousands of miles away from each other. And so it's going to be really great. I think it's going to have a really affordable option for people who can't put forward. I think the base price we're going to go with is $15 a month. But we'll have a $5 tier that's just on our system if you really want to join, but don't have the funds available. So with that being said, I'm going to get right into the presentation on the Thema Mundi. Start the slideshow, a little title slide. And just starting off with a table of contents as usual. I have some definitions that we'll need to know, as well as 3 quotes from sources. And then we're going to talk about what the Thema Mundi teaches us, right? So Firmicus tells us that the Thema Mundi is basically a teaching tool that was used in ancient astrology. What does it teach us? It teaches us about domicile rulership, aspects, and it's sort of the basis for the exaltations. And among other things, it's really you can kind of meditate on this model and just learn so much about the nature of the planets, the nature of the signs, some of the nature of the houses even, as well as the nature of aspects. And it is a really beautiful sort of linking of the 4 concepts that we've talked about up until this point. So we've done just a general overview of astrology, and then we've done planets, signs, houses, and aspects. Those are the 4 building blocks. They all really come together, less so houses than the other 3, but they really tie together in the Thema Mundi in a way that is fundamentally distinct from modern astrology. So that's the table of contents, and let's get into it. So starting off, Thema Mundi is Latin for birth chart of the world, or nativity. So thema means chart, nativity, and mundi means earth, so world. And then the Greek that this comes from is cosmogenesis, so nativity of the cosmos, creation chart of the cosmos, genesis, right? Creation, beginning, cosmos. So nativity of the cosmos, it sort of has this mythical charge to it. It's not a real chart, although I saw someone on Twitter tweeted about in the year 5100 and something, we're actually going to see the Thema Mundi. It's not going to be the exact degrees necessarily, but it's just kind of interesting. So what it is, excuse me, is a mythical birth chart that displays the traditional domicile assignments used as a teaching tool in ancient times. So very simple. So yeah, moving on. So I have three quotes here. The first one is from Dorotheus, saying, understand the houses of the planets, for truly Cancer is the house of the moon, in Leo, the house of the sun, in Capricorn and Aquarius, the two houses of Saturn, in Sagittarius and Pisces, the two houses of Jupiter, and Aries and Scorpio, the two houses of Mars, and Taurus and Libra, the two houses of Venus, and Gemini and Virgo, the two houses of Mercury. So this is book 1, sentence 13 of the Bendix edition. And sentence 14, this is not entirely necessary, but it kind of brings in sect as well. So it says, Saturn delights in his stay in Aquarius, and Jupiter in Sagittarius, so the two daytime planets rejoicing in their daytime domiciles, the air sign and fire sign. And Mars in Scorpio, and Venus in Taurus, and Mercury in Virgo. So we have Mars and Venus, the two nocturnal planets, taking joy in their, or delighting in Scorpio and Venus, a water and an earth sign. And then Mercury and Virgo, I'm not entirely sure why. I think maybe because in the Thema Mundi, Mercury is an evening star. So then Mercury would be rejoicing in, or delighting in Virgo, the earth sign, as opposed to Gemini, the air sign. And I'll refer back to this when we see the actual chart. So this is from Firmicus. Firmicus Maternus wrote, I think, in the 4th century. He was a Latin author. He goes with this whole invocation of a bunch of different gods and authors before, and says they put the sun in the 15th degree of Leo, the moon in the 15th degree of Cancer, Saturn in the 15th degree of Capricorn, Jupiter in the 15th degree of Sagittarius, Mars in the 15th degree of Scorpio, Venus in the 15th degree of Libra, Mercury in the 15th degree of Virgo, and the ascendant in the 15th degree, the degree of Cancer. So this is, some authors will put in like degree placements, some won't. It's the same thing with the exaltations. Sometimes people say the whole sign of Aries is the exaltation of the sun, but then they'll also say, like, I think it's like the 3rd degree is like the exaltation degree, or 19th maybe. I never remember those. So this is just another sort of saying the same thing. It doesn't reference the 2nd domicile. It just has it in the actual chart. They all kind of fan out along the bottom of the chart. So this is our 3rd quote from Paul of Alexandria. I put this in because it's pretty much the same, except that he puts the sun in the 19th degree of Aries, which, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe later becomes the exaltation degree, but it's also just incorrect. So he says, accordingly, the sun is in the 19th degree of Aries, the moon in the 15th degree of Cancer, Saturn 15th degree of Capricorn, the star of Jupiter 15 Sagittarius, star of Mars 15th degree of Scorpio, star of Venus 3rd degree of Libra, kind of interesting. And the star of Mercury in the 7th degree of Virgo, with the basis rising in Cancer. So the basis is like the rising sign, like the ascendant. The degree of the ascendant is the 15th of Cancer. And it says it's taken in the 11th nocturnal hour, which is impossible, because if Cancer is rising, then in the sun in Aries, it would be like noon. So I just thought that was interesting. And then he has this other little paragraph, says, this is the nativity of the mortal and earthly world. In these particular signs, the stars just mentioned first appeared, having eternal breath situated in the immortal part, whence also these signs are named their domiciles. So here we have him explicitly saying that this is like when the world first appeared, this is where all the planets were, allegedly. And this is like where they took their first breath. So this is like their home. This is like the first place they arrived. So they just called these places home, and became responsible for them as like domicile masters. So you can kind of think of it as like, now we see that when a planet is in its home sign, it's not just that there's like an affinity between that planet and sign. It's like this planet is returning home, is returning to a place where it was born. And therefore, you know, it does have a certain affinity, but it's kind of a different logic. Okay, so those are the 3 quotes, again, from Dorotheus, writing in like the 1st century, Firmicus writing in the 4th, and Paul of Alexandria, I can't remember when exactly he wrote. I think in like the 2nd or 3rd. So this is the Thema Mundi. This is the diagram. And you'll see that it only marks 1 domicile for each planet, but basically, if we kind of split it in 2, I'll get into this in the next slide, we have kind of like the relationship to the sun and then the relationship to the moon. So we always have like slowest or fastest to slowest in relation to whatever luminary is on this side. So if the sun, And then we have Mercury, the fastest planet that never gets more than one sign away. We have Venus, the next slowest planet, only ever gets 2 signs away. Then we have Mars, the next slowest, and then Jupiter, the next slowest, and then Saturn. And so same thing over here, we would have Mercury taking up in Gemini, Venus in Taurus, Mars in Aries, Jupiter in Sag, and Saturn in Aquarius. So we're basically just going to reiterate that with this slide. And again, it's just important to know that even though it only shows one, these are not even the preferred domiciles for all of them. Like remember, Saturn takes delight in Aquarius, the air sign, and Venus delights in Taurus. So it's just important to remember. So basically, it just tells us who rules what sign, who takes up residence in what sign, and it's the basis for this guest-host relationship. So not only is Venus going to be more powerful in Libra, Venus is going to be responsible for any planet that happens to fall in Libra in any chart, always. So let's say Mercury is in Libra. Mercury has all these significations of like communication, writing, speech, and siblings. And then Mercury is going to be like, Venus, I need help bringing these into this person's life because this is your sign. And Venus, depending on her condition, is going to be like, okay, well, you know, here is a really good like poetry teacher or something. And so then you can write in a really beautiful style, or you can become like a lawyer or something, right, with the scales. And so this will color any signification of any planet based on what sign it's in. And this just tells us like a scheme of who rules what. And so it also sets up sets of opposing planets as well as planetary detriments. So taking the example of Venus in Libra, because Venus is in Libra, if we take it directly opposite, she's going to be having her detriment. Excuse me, I'm getting kind of sick again, in Aries. And so we have these sets of planetary opposites, which are the lights and Saturn. So we have the sun and the moon being opposite to the 2 signs of Saturn. We have Mercury opposite to Jupiter. We have Virgo opposite Pisces, Gemini opposite Sagittarius. And then we have Venus opposite Mars. So like that. So Libra is opposite to Aries, and Scorpio is opposite to Taurus. So we have this sort of complex web of relationships sort of beginning to form. So that is domicile rulership. And then for the question of why Cancer rising, there's this quote from Demetra George in Astrology in the Authentic Self, because there's some debate on it. It doesn't really seem to be a settled question, but this is what she has to say. In the Egyptian tradition, the beginning of the new year, and hence also the birthday of the world, was timed to the heliacal rising, which is, heliacal rising is when a planet becomes, or anything becomes visible from, it's like beyond the light of the sun. So it's like, let's say the sun is in Cancer, right? That's a good example to use. If the sun is in Cancer, then the sun will be right in front of it all day, and you can't see the actual stars. You can only see the stars that are far enough away from the sun so that once it sets, they're visible at night. And so when the sun gets, usually about a sign away, 15 degrees away, things become really visible. And so there's this heliacal rising of the star Sirius, which is one of the stars in Cancer, that took place in the summertime and heralded the rising of the Nile. So there's this flooding of the Nile that provided like rich soil, and basically all the people that lived there forever have relied on it. In a summer chart, when the sun is in Leo, the sign Cancer rises in the pre-dawn hours when the heliacal rising of the stars of planets can be seen. I might have written that down wrong, but basically the point is that this star Sirius was really important in the Egyptian world, which is, Egypt was one of the 2 main places that Hellenistic astrology grew out of. And they really gave us this concept of like houses and decans. They used like the rising and setting and culminating of different stars to time things. It was like really important in their calendrical system. And so Sirius was really important because it heralded this like life-giving event every single year that was like foundational to how they survived. And so that was like their new year. And so this is, like she says, a good argument for where this might come from. Just this really important event. It's like the new birth every year. The Nile floods over. You could also think of it maybe being kind of similar as like when a woman gives birth, the first thing that happens is her water breaks. And so there's this like flooding event also kind of paralleled with like an individual life, and being the sign of the moon and a sign of cardinal or movable water sort of overflowing into new territory. That's just kind of a parallel. So the other thing that the Thema Mundi shows us is aspects. So I talked about this in the aspects video, but basically the relationship between a planet's domiciles and the signs of the luminaries can help us understand that aspect. So let's take the example of Venus. We see Venus is sextile to the sun, Libra to Leo, and sextile to the moon, Taurus to Cancer. We also see that Mars is square to the sun from Scorpio and square to the moon from Aries. And we see that Jupiter is trine the sun from Sag and trine the moon from Pisces. And then we see that Saturn is opposite the sun from Aquarius and opposite the moon from Capricorn. So what this tells us, and it was in the last video, is that whenever we see a aspect like a sextile between two planets, it can be any two planets, we can say that their relationship has something of the nature of Venus in it. So it's like friendly, harmonious, and mutually beneficial in some way. A relationship of the square is like that of Mars. It's tense, it's hostile, it's adversarial, but it's like dominating. So like Mars is not interested in just opposing you. Mars is interested in dominating and submitting something and like owning it. And so then we have Jupiter being trine to the two lights, and we see Jupiter with a lot of its like legal and religious associations being and like familial and like patriarchal in the sense of like having like a benefactor, right, to aid you in things, right? Jupiter would be a trine. So when two planets are trine to one another, there is this relationship of one being very giving and generous and like sort of abundant and overflowing to the other. And then finally we have Saturn opposing the two lights, and Saturn is not necessarily going to be this like heated contest like Mars is, where one planet is like overcoming the other and like destroying it, right? Saturn is opposing it and just kind of like sapping the life out of things and like slowing things down and like attacking from far away, and just denying things, right? So Mars is going to be like annihilating and destroying, where Saturn is going to be denying and excluding and darkening, right? Because it's opposed to the light. So anytime that there's an opposition between two planets, we can say that this relationship is of the nature of Saturn, where the two are kind of at a crossroads, and it's like no one's getting the upper hand, no one's going anywhere. It's just like a standoff. And it's like irresolvable conflict, you know, or tension, whereas a square maybe is a little bit less so, where one planet is always going to be on top, and it's going to be like exerting force on the other in some way. There's probably a lot more you can do with this with aspects, where you can probably analyze like, you know, how like Venus and Saturn relate in the Thema Mundi, where they're related by squares and trines, right? So there's something about them that is at one hand tense and at another hand like really beneficial, where we have like Venus Saturn signification might be something like marriage, where it can be really beneficial and really long lasting and beautiful and like societally uplifting, right? I think trines can sometimes have a lot to do with that, where there's like this official standing and like rank that can be granted by trines. But then there's also a square where they're sort of fraught with difficulties and danger. So it's just, I think people could do a lot with that. So finally, we have the exaltations. So the exaltations aren't like explicit in the Thema Mundi, but Chris Brennan talks a lot about this in his course and in his book, and I think he has a paper on it and a podcast about it too, a couple of them, which I'll link at the end of the video. So basically we can like see this scheme drawing from the Thema Mundi. It's again not explicit. So to start off, we have all the nocturnal planets are exalted in signs sextile to one of their domiciles. So that would be the moon up here in Taurus. Venus would be exalted in Libra, so sextile to Taurus, and then Mars is exalted in Capricorn. I'm having trouble remembering the names of the signs today. And so this is interesting because it's like the benefic aspect of the nocturnal planet. So we could maybe even say that in a night chart, perhaps, or between nocturnal planets, between planets of this sect, the sextile would be more powerful, or like perhaps more important or more comfortable for these planets than a diurnal one. There might also be something that's a little bit more subtle and perhaps like secretive or hidden or not apparent at first sight about a sextile, but that's kind of besides the point. So we see that we're dividing this by sect. We see the night planets are receiving like a positive nocturnal aspect, whereas the daytime planets, the diurnal planets, are all trine to one of their domiciles. So that would be the sun ruling Leo, taking its exaltation in Aries, Saturn in Libra, taking its exaltation there, and then its domicile of Aquarius being trine to it, and then Jupiter also being trine to Pisces. So there we see that there is the positive diurnal aspects of the aspect that is of the nature of Jupiter being displayed in the exaltations here. And so what's kind of interesting is that we see there's a difference, right, between domicile and exaltation, where domicile is like you're the master of the home, and it's really nice to be at your house, but you also have all this responsibility where you have to fix things up and keep things running. And if you have a guest, you have to like really take care of them. And if you can't take care of it, it's like they're going to be upset. Where when a planet's exalted, it's like they are the honored guest. They're not in their own house. Excuse me. They don't have the responsibility. They're just hanging out and like being given fancy treats that they love and exalted. So they're living it up and they don't have the same responsibility. So it's really interesting also that the houses that are in aversion to the ascendant, so that would be the 12th, 2nd, 6th, and 8th do not have an exaltation. And also the 5th, but there's only 7 planets, there's 8 good houses. So, you know, when I'm looking at this, I might think, okay, well, we see that it's kind of nice that the sun and Saturn are exalted in a sign that's trine from their diurnal sign, right? But not Jupiter. Jupiter's trine from his nocturnal sign, which is not, excuse me, his preferred domicile. So instead, you see that he is trine from, so he's trine from his nocturnal domicile. But if we take a trine from his diurnal one, or his diurnal one, then it would put us in a dark house. It would put us in the 2nd house that's in aversion to the ascendant. And if we did it the other way, it would take up the sign that is occupied already by the sun. And same thing, if we took Leo, the sign of the sun, and went out here, we would see in another aversion. So we need to find something else to do there. The sun can't go anywhere else. So then Jupiter has to be put in Cancer instead of Leo or Aries. And so it's kind of interesting where it's like Jupiter is exalted in an element where he has no triplicity rulership, whereas like the sun is the primary triplicity ruler of fire. Jupiter is the secondary one, but you would think that he would be exalted in that element, but no. So it's really complicated, but this also includes the degrees. The degrees are more of a medieval construct, I think. They maybe appear in the Hellenistic text. I'm not actually sure, but I don't usually use them. I can never remember them. I just use the signs for exaltations, where it's like if the sun is in Aries, it's exalted. Moon's in Taurus, exalted. It's also kind of interesting that there is no opposition to the moon. So this is the next point. There's a new set of contrarieties here, where at first we had before, where it was like the lights opposite Saturn, Mars opposite Venus, and Jupiter opposite Mercury. Here we have just the sun opposite Saturn, and then we have Mars opposite to Jupiter. We have Venus opposite to Mercury, and we have the moon opposite to nothing. And so Firmicus does talk about this. I didn't pull any quotes from it, but this makes sense, right? Where if we have, I'll go back to the other, like just the Thema Mundi. And so like if we see, like it makes sense where like if the sun and the moon represent like life and brightness and the breath and health and vitality, and they're opposite to Saturn, Saturn significations, and they the luminaries occupy signs of summer, Saturn occupies the signs of winter. And so things are cold and dying and decaying, and they're slowing down and they're becoming old. And so there's a natural contrariety there. Likewise with Venus and Mars, so we have these signs opposite each other. We have, the classic like love and strife. We have Venus representing like relationship, like romantic or otherwise, just like being joined to other people in a way that's beneficial. And we have Mars seeking to like sever and destroy that. So they're opposed to each other as well. And then finally, we have Mercury and Jupiter. Mercury is going to be like the lawyer or the dialectician who's like ripping apart Jupiter's religious doctrines or laws, right? I always, you get people saying all kinds of different things, but I always like Jupiter's signification being like the capital L law, and Mercury being the one who like twists it and manipulates it to win a court case. And so they are not necessarily friends, but they're sort of working in tandem on a similar goal, as any opposition in astrology is. So with that in mind, we can now go to the exaltations, and we set up a new set of contrarieties. So this is the sun opposite to Saturn, where the sun most directly, where the moon also, but the sun most directly is like light, visibility, life, the heat of your body being alive and doing things and like thinking and like inspiration and like being enlightened, right? That's a solar term. And then Saturn is very directly opposing it, saying no, basically, right? And so it's interesting too, where we have the sun being exalted in the 10th house of the Thema Mundi, the highest point in the sky. It's also the start of spring in the northern hemisphere. And then we have Saturn at the darkest point in the chart, the lowest, most underneath the earth, most hidden, most secretive, sometimes associated with death also, where like the 10th would be like the peak of life, the most active portion of life. And the 4th house is like your family life, your ancestors, those who have already died, your parents, and also sometimes your own death would be considered there. So next we have Mars opposite to Jupiter. So it's kind of similar here, where we have Jupiter in Cancer, and we have maybe a connection again with the Nile sort of overflowing and like being full of water to the point where it's just like bursting. That's very Jupiterian. And it's opposite to Mars, where this is something that happens in the summer, where there's like, you know, just an abundance of life. Like you go out in the summer and you can hear things chirping all night. There's birds everywhere. You'll see animals running around. There's the plants are just exploding. Everything is so vibrant. And then in the winter, everything's been destroyed. Everything has been killed. Mars. And we see it start with Saturn, where Saturn is the marker of the start of fall, of autumn. And Mars is like sort of in a way the culmination, where it's like if Mars is exalted, it's like violence and destruction and hardship and death and strife are being exalted. And so that makes sense. Being opposite to Jupiter, we see like life being opposed again to death, light to darkness, summer to winter. And so now we see Venus opposed to Mercury. And I'm trying to remember what Firmicus says about this. I always think of like I went to music school, and I always think of like how it's really funny that it's really hard for like people who are really technically skilled at something sometimes to just like, in this case, musicians, to just like write a good song, where there's like the technical know-how of like, you need to know all the scales, and you got to like, you want to put all these crazy chords in, and like, you want to have like this innovative non-linear song structure and all this stuff. And then, but Venus is here just like, okay, but like, is it good music? Like, does it feel good? Is it like, do we really need to like innovate on this thing that is, it just feels good? Like we've had these 4-chord pop songs forever and they feel great. Everyone loves them. They make a ton of money and they're fun to party to. And so when we see Mercury being exalted, we have this like mental quality, this analysis, this debate, this like precision, and this like, let's just take it apart and learn all the rules and then see if we can put it back together and like kind of keep doing that. And Venus is like, okay, but is it like pleasurable? Does it make me feel close to other people? Does it make me want to move my body? And so they can be kind of opposed to each other. And so we see this where if we put like Venus in Virgo, again, if we think of the guest host metaphor, we have Venus being, she wants to create music in this instance. That's one of her significations. And Mercury is like, okay, well, here's like 20 books on music theory. Not necessarily going to be the best thing to do. And same thing where if we see Mercury is going to be in Pisces, Mercury is like, okay, I need to like really think. I need to like debate something with someone. I need to pull things apart. I need to write. And Venus is like, okay, well, how about kind of similar to what we were saying in Libra? How about like some free verse poetry, or how about some like songwriting or something that's like very imaginative and poetic and loose? And so it's not always the most comfortable scenario, but sometimes it turns out really well, as sometimes does Mercury and Virgo. Obviously, we have things like music theory for a reason. They can be very descriptive of things that are already happening, but it's not necessarily like the most enjoyable or like pleasurable place for Venus to be in. So finally, we have the moon not being opposed to anything. The moon takes its exaltation in Taurus, fall in Scorpio. And so Firmicus has this quote, and I should have definitely included it, talking about how like where the moon is exalted, because the moon represents the fortune and like comings and goings of fortune, so like the ups and downs of the whole thing. Where the moon is exalted, like there, no planet can be depressed, and where the moon is depressed in Scorpio, no planet can be exalted. So with the moon having these significations of like the daily like rhythm of life and the like general fortune of the native, or whatever thing the chart is representing, excuse me, where the moon is exalted, it's like it can't really be taken down. The moon is kind of special in that case. And so, as I've already kind of alluded to, the opposite of exaltation is fall. This is not a video on the exaltation, so I should probably shut up. But we can see their root in the Thema Mundi, and we can see that just from this one chart, just from this one beautiful chart, that there's just so much that you can draw from it. There's all the relationships between all the planets become very rich and living. And yeah, just so much good stuff. So just to summarize, the Thema Mundi ties together the planets, signs, and aspects and the houses, arguably, in a way that is fundamentally different from modern astrology. Assigning planets to signs is not based on the affinity between the sign and the planet, but on the planet's speed and distance from the sun. So this is where we get things where like the modern rulership is like, I don't recommend using it. I don't use it because it's not relevant, honestly, to this system. It's like we didn't assign Saturn to Capricorn because Saturn is similar to Capricorn. We assigned it because it's far away from the luminaries. And it ends up, where it's like Saturn takes on the qualities of Capricorn and Capricorn takes on the qualities of Saturn. But it's not the original meaning. It's like we just kind of stuck Uranus and Aquarius because they seemed kind of similar, but it messes up this system that's really well balanced. Like it's just a good system. And then it leaves Saturn with only one domicile. And you see that in modern astrology. It's like Saturn is a miserable fuck. It's just like compared to what he is in ancient astrology. He's pretty miserable in ancient astrology too, but it's just, he becomes so one-sided when you take away Aquarius. And same thing kind of with Jupiter. I think when Jupiter loses Pisces, it really loses a whole dimension of its being. It loses its feminine side, Capricorn, or Saturn loses its masculine side, and Mars loses its feminine side as well. Mars becomes only Aries. Mars becomes like the hot-headed, crazy baby. Where if we think of where it's like, it's not wrong that Pluto is going to be similar to Scorpio with this like surging into the depths and this like secrecy and this strategic planning and this like never letting anyone see your cards. Like that's a Martian characteristic. That's also perhaps a Plutonian characteristic, but it's a Martian characteristic also. And so we rip a lot of meaning off of these 7 planets, which have enough meaning to kind of read the whole chart. Again, not saying not to use outer planets. I don't really just when I'm looking at a birth chart, I will in transits a lot of times, but I just think it's really important to know this scheme. It's really important. So with that, that is pretty much it. I have this page of resources. I've included some page numbers here for you if you want to just go read or listen to this stuff. A lot of times in like the traditional text, there's not much explanation. It's a lot of just like, here's what it is, so a lot of them are like, you get like 2 sentences. So like in Dorotheus, you get literally 2 sentences. So we have Chris Brennan, Hellenistic Astrology Study, Fate and Fortune, 228 to 240. There's about 12 pages there. Dimitri George, Astrology and the Authentic Self, 41 to 47. I had a quote in there from page 42. Ancient Astrology in Theory and Practice, Volume 1. I should include that because Volume 2, I think, is out today. 171 to 180. And then we have Paul of Alexandria. I have the James Holden translation. I don't know if there's another good one. His Introduction to Astrology, chapter 37. We have Porphyry. It's sorry, I don't need to show him. Porphyry, the Philosopher. It's translated by James Holden. It's an introduction to the Tetrabiblos. The one that I have also has a Serapio of Alexander, just like definition pamphlet. Chapters 5 and 6, Dorotheus of Sidon, these 2 sentences. Book 1, chapter 1, sentences 13 and 14, and then book 1, chapter 2. It's pretty short. Then we have Firmicus, translated by James Holden, his Mythesis, book 3, chapter 2. There's definitely more in there. I haven't read all of book 3 yet, so if I do, maybe I'll update this or something. And then the astrology podcast. He hasn't done an episode on the Thema Mundi. I think he should. I think it'd be a good episode. But he's done the origins of the Exaltations, a new discovery. You get just like a ton of information on the Thema Mundi, just like in hearing about it. And then also the origins of the concept of detriment. Both of these, I think, are with Ben Dykes. So it's like high level discussion. You learn a ton, and it's just like, it's so good. I eat that shit up. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you get something out of it. If you ever have any topics that you want me to cover, please let me know. Comments below. Find me on Twitter. And like I said, my readings are now open. Again, you can find that information on like the landing page on YouTube or in my bio on Twitter. I'll have like a link tree to a scheduling page. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.